Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads to get to those books that have made the biggest impact, have left the most indelible mark on their career, on their life, the books that have really stood out. I want to get out and get those recommendations, whether they are the author or they're reading somebody else's book. And my guest today is Nick Cooney, and Nick is the founder and managing partner of venture capital firm Lever VC and the founder and board chair of Lever Foundation, a nonprofit focused on advancing a humane and sustainable food system. He is the author of several books on effective charity and philanthropy work, including How to Be Great at Doing Good, Why Results Are What Count, and How Smart Charity Can Change the World. And the other book, Change of Heart, What Psychology Can Teach Us About Spreading Social Change. I love those titles. I love those themes. His latest book is What We Don't Do, Inaction in the Face of Suffering and the Drive to Do More. Nick advises on effective giving and previously founded and co-founded the nonprofits, the Humane League and the Good Food Institute. He's a graduate of Hofstra University. Excuse me, I should know that. That's my alma mater. And he lives in the greater New York City region. And Nick, thank you so much for being here for this conversation.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And to begin, great bio, obviously great themes in those books that I referenced, which I'll ask about in a little bit. But first, I always ask, who are you today? So the bio gives a great kind of summary of who a person is, but what does the work that you're doing look like in the day-to-day?
Indeed. So day to day, my professional focus, as you noted, is I help run a VC firm called Lever VC, which I set up with some partners a number of years ago. And so day to day, we are looking at early stage food and ag companies that are in the more sustainable, healthier side of food and ag, developing innovative solutions or products or similar in that space. We are looking at them and considering investment into them. And then we look at a large number of those. We invest in a very small handful of those. And then we try to support those companies as they grow through their journey as a company, ultimately, hopefully being financially successful. So day to day my work on the investment side is focused on those aspects, right? Reviewing deals, making decisions, supporting companies, et cetera. In addition to that work I do on the investment side, as you noted, I've also done work for a number of years on the charity and philanthropy side. And so today, most of that sort of volunteer time, personal time, passion time is with Lever Foundation, which is a charity working to advance a sustainable food system. And so trying to support some of the team members there and the organization from my position as a board member there with high-level strategy, fundraising, those sort of things to help the team over that foundation be as impactful as they can in their own work. So yeah, it's a split. And I would say the common thread that runs across both of those things, whether it's the investment side or the charitable side, is trying to quantify impact and make hopefully smart, or hopefully many times smart, strategic decisions about what's going to drive the greatest returns on the fund side, the financial returns on the fund side, and drive the greatest ROI for environment, animals, human health, et cetera, on the foundation side.
Fascinating. And this leads into my next question, because I want to find out how somebody gets to that point where they are running a VC, founding a VC, a managing partner, but at the same time, because to me, I don't know, I'm not judging at all, but I don't typically hear those two together, venture capital with sustainability. And, so this next question is going to fascinate me in terms of to get to who you are today. What did your path look like? And I typically like to start with anywhere from high school level to today, right around that level where somebody's trying to figure out what they're going to go into, or when they enter the workforce. What did that look like for you from then to now?
Yeah, a bit of a strange path, and you're right. I mean, I think not a lot of folks that work both put significant time both into the finance world and the charity world, although certainly there are others that do as well.
Yeah.
For me, I would say so in terms of the threads that tie into that in the current career path, so a strong dominant thread from, I would say, start of college through today is a desire to make the world a better place. So concern around that, and then in particular concern around the food system and the impact that that has on different things: environmental sustainability, animal welfare, human health, etc.
So Nick, even
Yeah.
before that though, where did that come from for you? What was the foundation for your thinking at such a relatively young age that was a driver for you?
I would say the psychological foundation is probably being raised Catholic, which I'm not still religious today, but being raised to think that there's right and wrong, and it's important to do the right thing. I think that general feeling, which was instilled in me from that religious background, definitely stuck. And then I'd say a second thing would be getting into certain cultural things, like when I was younger, punk rock music, for example, and some other things, some random social causes, I think generated this mindset of look for and pay attention to injustice in the world, and then look to solve it, even if it's at times can cut against the norm or conventions of society. Yeah, I think those would be the two threads from even younger age that tied into that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off. I was just curious, just what the foundation might have been for that. But yeah, go on, please.
Yeah. I think it's that, and of course, there's always genes, like genetic and things and so forth, sitting behind it. But I think that's probably the roots for me, or the tree. In terms of where that went, so for me, from in college, started getting involved in different philanthropic, charitable advocacy type efforts in a few areas, but largely focused around things related to the food system. Started a nonprofit shortly after graduating from college, one of the ones you mentioned, the Humane League. Later co-founded a second, and then started Lever Foundation in 2017, so about 8 years back from today. So that thread of working to do things on the charity and philanthropy side to have some benefits to the world in those ways, that's been very consistent. In terms of working on the investment side, so I would say growing up was always very into numbers. Math was my favorite subject at school. Always really enjoyed thinking logically, thinking quantitatively. I studied journalism initially in college, and then graduated with a more generic major called interdisciplinary studies. So kind of moved away from being focused on hard sciences, and never studied finance in college. But it was really working in and around things in the food system that led me to then be doing some work on the investment side in the food system. And from there, transitioning into working full time in the finance side for that space. Incredible. So it really was sort of sector in as opposed to finance in.
Yeah, because I thought you went the finance route and then happened to, by whatever circumstance, go into sustainability and the charity work. When you were in college, you said you went in, I believe, for journalism and then ended up interdisciplinary studies. What was that evolution like? What was that? How did you switch? Why did you switch? What was the thinking there?
Yeah, and obviously quite a coincidence that we both went to Hofstra. So, I started there as a journalism major, liked writing a lot, still like writing, thus writing the new book, what we don't do. So do enjoy writing. I did then. What led me to shift from journalism to a more general degree was this feeling that as a journalist, I could write about things going on in the world and hopefully through that affect some positive change. But by maybe end of freshman year or sophomore year, came to the view that I didn't want to be the person writing about it. I wanted to be the person hopefully driving some of that change. And thus I just spent the last couple years of college in this unique program that the school had where you could kind of do what you wanted. I made up some of my own classes, took a range of subjects, did some work study abroad, those sort of things. Basically just learning and dabbling in various things and graduating with an interdisciplinary degree instead.
Okay. Now, where did your parents play into all this? Were they the charitable kind, social issues kind? Did you see that at home? Did that, aside from the religion component, obviously a lot of that comes from our parents, our upbringing. Was there that other side as well, the charitable, social issues, whatever it may be at home? Did that also influence that foundation for you?
I would say in a light way, I would say what was we did debate political things a decent amount, especially, I mean, I don't remember that at all when I was a young child, but as a mid-teenager, older teenager, definitely remember having those sort of political debate conversations. So I think that contributed. And I think that general spirit of, to be a good Catholic in my parents' case is to, you do this and you don't do that. And that's important. That's very important. I think, which obviously is the religion aspect. My parents, it's not like I remember us giving to charity a lot, in small ways, sure, but it wasn't like a big focus of the family or anything like that. So I would say there would be bits and pieces of it that were there.
Now, when you say debating, was it debating with them or them standing up for obviously what the family believed in against, or for doing good in the world? Where did that debate come into? Or was it just kind of, this is our belief, this is what it represents, so this is what we have to go out and do? What does that mean, debate?
I think interfamily, just debating between ourselves.
Okay.
Of very strong-willed people arguing their point, and those points often disagreeing. Yes. Yeah. It wasn't family against the world. It was everybody in the family arguing against one another on these things.
So what did you take away from that? What shows up now? What showed up in school? What showed up in your career path that maybe, if you follow it back, stems back to those kind of interfamily debates?
I think probably numerous things. So one is feeling comfortable debating generally and feeling comfortable with sort of verbal sparring about a topic. Here's what I think. Here's what you think. Let's go at it. I think thinking through viewing political and social topics as being important and worth talking about. I'm sure there's lots of families that basically never talk about those sort of things. So viewing those sort of things as something that is worth spending time on, that's worth talking about. And I think trying to probably there's the basis there of trying to find logical reasons for why one does what one does and thinks what one thinks and believes in the things one believes in. That I think debate can get you closer to that, can realize when there aren't those things, when it's what you were taught to do, what others are doing. It's not something that has a logical basis. I think those would be some things that came out of that. Yeah, my dad actually, my parents both worked in schools. My mom, grade school librarian, my dad, grade school teacher. And my dad also taught debate. And so I was on the debate club for several years in grade school. So that, I think that tied in with all of those same things as well. Okay.
So I took you back down to the family, to the religion, to the debating. Now jumping back ahead, you had left off in the finance world, having established the foundations. Anything else between then and now that I might have missed or that you wanted to share?
I think that's the high level. To the point about that segue of going from doing more work on the NGO side of things, that side of things, into finance without having studied finance at all in school. Though being quantitatively minded, thinking kind of systemically, logically, trying to think systemically and logically through things. Venture capital is an interesting space in that there's a solid chunk of folks, a large chunk of folks that work in this space that, similar to me, were not finance majors. They worked in a certain area or did a certain thing and used what they learned in that domain to then transition over to working in venture capital. It is a good bit different than a lot of other areas of finance where you basically have to get, or nearly everyone working in this space got an MBA or similar and then moved in that trajectory. Venture capital is a bit more unique where you can come with operator experience, entrepreneurship experience, or domain experience, and then from there move into the VC space and learn some of the finance things you did not pick up in university or grad degree days.
You had mentioned moving, I believe, from NGO to VC, right? I think you had just mentioned that. Can you speak to the NGO experience?
Yeah. So much of my first dozen years or so out of college was working from the nonprofit side to advance more sustainable food systems. Many of those with an NGO they started, also worked for a couple other NGOs as well. co-founded another, but all within this general domain of working to make improvements in the food system, be it from corporate policy side, from individual consumer decision making side, or some other angles. So it involves working with large corporates, providing essentially consultation style services to some of them. It involved public education and public persuasion, working on public policy and corporate policy, range of things. But the commonality of all of it was virtually all in the food system space.
And then, Nick, I always ask the question, between what you've mentioned and what I've asked, the stories you've told, the structure of your family and whatnot, you've kind of answered this question about who you were as a younger person leading to the work that you're doing now. But here's that direct question. Does it make sense from your childhood that this is the work that you're doing? I'm always curious about who someone was as a kid and how that shows up in the work they're doing today. So with that direct question,
yeah.
What can you provide for that? What comes to mind?
Yes and no. Right? So I think maybe I'll give the no side first. So I think the no is I have a sister and a brother. They are doing very different things that I am, right? Same genes, same cultural environment, obviously diverging experiences as you get into adulthood and go off and leave the home, et cetera, right? But very similar first 18 years of life, at least from the basic, in terms of basic things. And obviously same gene pool that they're coming from. So I think obviously like with anyone, there's this really wide range of outcomes that could come from the same gene, same environmental background. That being said, certainly I think it's easy for me to look back at upbringing and my parents and their psychology, et cetera, and see like, okay, like these parts clearly came together into like how I am. Like I clearly can see some of those constituent parts in their psychology and in that upbringing. So for example, my mom always very, very opinionated and very, very strong-willed, extremely strong-willed in things. And so I think clearly that thinking came through to kind of me and how my personality is. I think this, both of them very, tying in with one of the themes of the book, What We Don't Do, both of them, but especially my mom, very careful with how money was spent. And so I think that mentality of being very frugal and prudent with money and how you spend it definitely tied through to general life decisions, but also in thinking about some of the ethical implications of that. And that's really what the bulk of What We Don't Do is all about. That concern for doing right or wrong. I think all of those things, it's to me very easy to see how, okay, sure, like this person that I am today, or a large part of it could come from those genes, that upbringing, that culture, that family culture.
You brought it up. So what are your brother and sister up to?
My brother is an engineer, electrical engineer. My sister works in both childcare and some, call it creative arts, performing arts things. So yeah, those are the career
Diverging
paths that they've both taken. Yeah.
Nick, what do you consider your superpower?
I would say if I think that there are things that I've done that I'm glad that I did them and I feel like they've had a positive effect on the world, like what is an attribute or two that were most instrumental in getting to the point of having done those things? I think it's a somewhat obsessive is too strong a word, right? But like obsessive light, like somewhat obsessive focus on feeling like it's like I am, like there's an ethical imperative to do as much good as possible, to reduce as much suffering in the world as possible. And somewhat obsessive light, focusing on like that and the numbers around that. Okay, well, like how much good was achieved in the last 6 months and last year? What could achieve even more? Comparing these two options, which is going to achieve more? Like just as a random person might focus somewhat obsessively on making money and optimizing that for me. But in this broader domain, I would say is something that I don't see many people doing. And I think that a very strong focus on that and kind of tying other decisions back to that same central goal. Maybe that's another way to describe it, is like having this very clear, quantified central goal and trying to think about most things in life about how they tie back to that central goal, and did they help achieve it or did they not? Is it the best way or is it not the best way to get towards that central goal? That focus on a quantified central goal that is reduce suffering in the world, that's probably the cleanest way to describe. I wouldn't call it a superpower, but a way of thinking and a mental disposition that I think has helped me have some positive impacts in life on others.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. And then before we dive into, I want to go through a quick walkthrough of your previous books, and then we'll dive into the last book. But before we get into the books, what does leadership mean to you? I'm always curious about my guests' definition, examples. When you think leadership, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah. You know, this is probably like a bit of a different take than many people would have. And I think there's a lot of value in what's typically thought of as leadership, and the qualities and attributes and way of relating to others in the world that makes for a good leader. I think there's a lot of truth in many of the general things said in that area. I'll give probably a slightly different take there, which is that when I think about who I learned the most from in life, and again, this probably varies person to person, right? So like other people, get a lot more from other types of folks. But for me, who did I learn the most from, and like what did they do that allowed me to learn? It wasn't them doing the things that are like speaking to me or acting to me in the ways that are often thought of when one pictures a good leader or reads essays or things like that about what good leadership is. It wasn't that. It was really just people who showed me a better, more effective way to achieve what I was trying to achieve. It's not so much it's not really how they talk to me or personality qualities or things like that. It really was just this person figured out a good way to do something, and they were sort of like reasonable, non-jerk in how they lived their life, right? Like they just were anywhere from the spectrum of pretty nice to just normal. But it really was more about figuring out, this person figured out how to better do what I want to do, and I can emulate them. I can copy from them, or at least I can emulate and copy the things that I really like, the things that I think are particularly helpful. So to me, what I would take forward from that is that I would, at least for the way my mind works, I think there's more value in helping people realize how to achieve the things that also matter to them. And those can be things that matter to you as well, right? So if there's people working for, say, the foundation where maybe their prior jobs were not focused in things that made the world a better place, but they come and work at the foundation, and now that is their focus, and their KPIs are around things that have a positive impact. I think both learning that, these are valuable goals to have, like these goals of improving the world in certain areas. This is a good life orientation to have. It's a good thing to focus one's work life around. And also, here are approaches and techniques that are successful at achieving those goals. That's what's most helpful for me, and hopefully that's one of the things that some people that I work with or that I manage directly or indirectly, hopefully that's something that they're taking away from me, because I do think that's the most valuable thing, at least when it comes to impact in the world around us.
No, that sounds great. So before we jump into the book we're going to cover in this episode, can you give me a quick walkthrough of the other two previous books that I mentioned, just how they came to be? What was it that called to you to write them? Just a little bit about each before we dive into the third.
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier, like having this long time focus around achieving this quantified goal I have two goals in life, right? One is I want to be happy. I want to enjoy life, enjoy the pleasures of life, have a good time, et cetera, like all of us do. But aside from that, my other goal and what I would view as the even bigger of those two goals, I want both, but the even bigger, more important one is I want to reduce as much suffering in the world as I can in the short time we each have to live. So that's really kind of my long-term driving goal in life. And with that in mind, and being a fairly quantitative thinker in many ways, I have often thought about, how can I be more effective, and how can others be more effective? And what can data and quantification and thinking based on that lead to in terms of being more effective? And so two past books I wrote, Change of Heart, which you mentioned, which is basically looking at what can the data from psychology studies and some related studies show us in terms of how to be more effective at persuading people to make better decisions, more sustainable decisions, more animal-friendly decisions, more healthy decisions, those sort of things. There's a lot of great data out there that NGOs typically don't look to, don't learn from, don't leverage in their public education campaigns and similar. So the goal was, okay, survey a lot of that literature, a lot of those articles, distill it down to some easy-to-use lessons, and then I can incorporate it and I can share with others, other NGOs for them to incorporate as well. So applying data to help be more effective at public persuasion. The second book was also similar in the sense of quantifying. So it was how to be great at doing good. The goal there was to think about, okay, if I'm writing a charity, working for charity, donating to a charity, what do I do? There's millions of charities. Which one do I give money to? There's endless programs that a charity could potentially do. Which ones should I, as a staffer or manager, do and focus on? So there's this question of, okay, this huge range of things we could do. What do we choose? And encouraging those that donate to charity, encouraging those that work at charities to try to take a quantified approach to that work, to think about, okay, what ultimately is my goal? It's probably some version of reducing suffering, increasing happiness and well-being. It's probably something roughly along those lines. So if we home in on, crystallize what really matters most, and then try to quantify it, then we can see that out of the 3 million nonprofits out there, there's a much smaller number that are way more effective than most of the rest. And so trying to home in on which ones those are. Same on the program side. There's a lot of programs we could do, but once we've got a very clear goal of reduce the most suffering, increase the most well-being, or however exactly we want to couch that goal of the charity, it's easier to both quantify the impact of different programs and strategies and then narrow focus on and really go deep on the things that have the biggest impact. So those are the first two books. And then What We Don't Do, which obviously we'll chat about, also involves trying to take a more quantitative approach to doing good in the world, but just from a different angle and in a different area.
Nick, when it comes to you launching the charities that you did, the organizations that you did, can you tell me a little bit about how that happened? What the trigger was for, obviously, you shared you've had that mentality for that work, for that focus, for doing that good, but what does it look like for you to say, okay, now I want to launch something, now I want to found something, especially various entities? What did that look like for you? Like, what was the thinking? What was the trigger? Because I think that's amazing.
I mean, I think it's really as simple as, I think this would be a good thing to do. I'm going to do it. Yeah. To dumb it down. I don't know, I guess I've sort of had a fairly entrepreneurial mindset, if you want to call it that, from also, at least college years. I think part of it harkens back to that spirit of, find what you think the right thing to do is and then do it. And you should do it. It's sort of your prerogative to do it. Having confidence that I could do something pretty well, that if somebody else can do, it's hard to figure out what to do, right? But I feel like once you figure out, okay, X is a good thing to do, I feel like for a lot of things, I can do X as well as many people. Not in every area. I definitely can't be creative in the way that certain others are creative and so on and so forth. Obviously, but I do feel like there's a lot of things where, if these other people can do X, I can do X too. If other people can start a nonprofit, I can start a nonprofit. If other people can start a VC fund, I can start a VC fund. So I think that, there's a bit of that self-confidence there, at least in some domains, that just tied in with the idea of, this would be a good thing. This should work. This would have a positive impact. And therefore it should be done and I should do it.
Incredible. All right. Why don't we dive into what we don't do? If you could just give us a little lead up to, you kind of gave a slight breakdown, but really what was the impetus for the book? Your thinking between your last books to this one, just anything that kind of gives us insight into how this book came to be.
Yeah. So from a young age, one of the things that, from at least teenage years, college age on, one of the things that's always been in my mind when I think about, am I living an ethical life, is how do I spend money? And that, I tell a little anecdote early in the book about when I was going into my sophomore year of college, and I'd kind of been thinking about the fact that look, I'm paying at the time, this is Hofstra circa 2000, the year 2000 in Long Island, paying about $2,000 for 3.5 months of renting a dorm room, which at the time seemed pretty expensive. And when I thought about the fact that there's 1 billion plus people that at that time were living on $1 or less per day, it just didn't seem right that, okay, I'm going to pay $2,000 to have 3.5 months of a dorm room, a shared dorm room, when that's a lot more than billions of other people in the world make and have to live off of. Like, it just doesn't seem like a right use of money. And so I was trying to decide what to do, and ultimately decided that I wasn't going to rent a dorm room. I was just going to crash with friends for that semester. I tell a little funny anecdote about that in the book, but I think it's just a good example of, from a fairly young age, this question of this idea that how we spend our money has ethical importance because it has a real impact on the world around us. That's been there, and it's an idea that I never really see, that I think we don't really hear about much. In bits and pieces, like when someone buys some flagrantly expensive things, as a billionaire buys a $200 million yacht. Yeah, you hear grumblings of what a waste of money when people are starving. But other than those very rare exceptions, it's just something that for most of us is not on our radar, including most of us that care about living a good life, want to live a good life, want to do good in the world. Most of us just don't think about that. And, as I've thought about over the years, a realization or belief I've come to, which I think is not just an opinion, but a factual reality of the world, is that for most of us in the US today, in other industrialized countries today, what we do and don't do with our money actually has more of an impact on the world, for good or for harm, than anything we do directly. In other words, not using the money we have to help those who could really benefit from the money is ultimately going to result in a lot more pain and suffering than any negative thing I might choose to do to somebody else. And it's a pretty non-obvious realization. It really goes against our intuitions and how we typically think about things. But it is a reality of the world, in my view. And so I wanted to write this book, What We Don't Do, to really talk through why that is the case today, when it was never the case, and for nearly all of human history, what changed to make that the reality, and what the implications are for our own lives and how we might think about that in the context of our own lives.
So what does that look like, Nick? When you set out to write the book, how do you structure it? I mean, you can talk about how it's structured now, the journey you take the reader through. But I'm curious, just because of the nature of the book, your experience with that mindset that you had at such a relatively young age that you don't hear about at that age, how did you, getting into the nuts and bolts of it, how did you want to set it up? And then how did it end up being the chapters, the structure, the story you wanted to tell?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it evolved. And one of the interesting things about writing this book, which I've since heard from many other authors, much more well-known and esteemed authors than little old me. But what's interesting to hear was that I've heard many talk about how in writing a nonfiction book on a certain topic, they came to learn so much more about that topic than they knew going in, even though they wrote it because it was something that was of interest to them. They knew a lot about, they had strong feelings around. And I found that to be the same. I feel like for me, the general idea of the book is one I've had for years. Many of the core themes of one I've had for years are things I have lived my life based on for years. But there's a lot of nuances that I think one doesn't discover until one is spending the time thinking and really thinking through what one is putting on paper. And the implication of that is, write a sentence. Okay, is this really true? What are the counter arguments to it? And that leads to this iterative thought process that I think really helped me understand the subject a lot more, even though it's something I already felt strongly. And so because it did sort of evolve, my thinking evolved a bit, or at least got more fine-grained around the nuances in the process of writing, the structure of the book evolved a bit as well. There was definitely a lot of writing things and then moving, mixing chapters and sections and so forth. Ultimately, what it ended up at is the first half of the book being really more focused on what I mean and why this came to be. What am I talking about when I say that what we don't do matters? And why does it matter for us today? What's the difference today versus human beings living 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago, where this was irrelevant for them, but today for us, it's really important. And then the second half of the book is the more practical side of, okay, if you buy this idea, if this makes sense to you and seems reasonable enough, what are the implications and how we might want to live our life? So it split into those two of background of why this matters and then what it means in our own life, or how we might use it in our own life in the second half.
What, excuse me, what kind of reactions have you gotten from people where you've been able to see, whether it's their reviews or you've known somebody, face to face in your life that's read the book? What have you heard from people? I'm curious to see how you might have opened their eyes that in ways that they didn't think about before. So what have been some of the responses, some of the feedback that you've gotten?
Yeah. So, obviously any feedback I hear is probably going to be biased to the positive side, right? Because at least if it's people that are messaging directly or saying in a conversation, right? The people that read it, didn't like it, they're probably just not going to say anything, right? So it's going to be biased towards the positive, but, definitely heard a lot of positive feedback. Heard it, I'd say like the general, when there has been that, what the general theme has been is that it's made people think a lot more deeply around this specific topic of how they spend their money and their time and how they should spend their time, money, energy going forward. So mainly this idea of it stimulating a lot deeper thought about those things and hopefully a lot more intentionality around the use of those things. I would say that's probably been the commonality from the positive feedback received.
Can you break down some information or some insights on the time component?
Yeah. So the book makes the case that there's three main resources that any of us have: money, time, and mental energy. And the question is, what do we do with those things, right? Money, we can try to make more, we might have less, but it's some definitive amount. Time, clearly it's a definitive amount, right? We can't add more hours to the day, can't live a lot longer than our lifespan, natural lifespan. And then mental energy is also something where we could put in more energy, we could put in less, but there's some limit. So all of these things are things where we can try to have more of them, but there's some limit. And there's this question of, okay, well, what do we do with them? And so when it comes to time, what are the ways that our time can be valuable to others and reduce the suffering of others? Numerous ways, but we could bucket into a couple things. Number one, I can use my time to make money. I can spend more time working. And with that money, I can turn around, donate to effective charities and save lives, reduce suffering, etc. So time equals ability to make money equals ability to save lives and do good things in the world. That's one way I can use my time. Another way I can use my time for the good is to directly do work that has really high impact. If I have skill set and the understanding to turn my time into really positive impacts in the world, well, great. Doing things directly is a way to turn one's time into good impacts in the world around us. So those are ways we can use our time to have really positive impacts. Of course, we can also use our time to do anything else. We can go ice skating. We can watch TV. We can, spend 2 hours trash talking somebody else. We could use them for neutral, for bad, for things that are pleasurable to us, but have no real impact beyond that. And obviously we're going to use time for things that are pleasurable as well. But the point around time is really just, we have a limited amount, and given smart use of our time, it can have such hugely positive impacts for those who are really suffering that maybe we should put more of our time, a larger percentage of our time, to those things that can really benefit those in need.
Nick, this is a huge question that I'm not really laying on your shoulders. But what do you think of the state of the world today? There's just so much going on, and I can see just from reading headlines for years now how this obviously plays into your life's work at this point. So I don't expect you to solve all the problems in a response or anything like that. It's no pressure. I'm just very curious as somebody who's committed their time, their education, beginning that early, their time of every sort, whether it's your full-time job, your full-time business, the charities, the organizations, the philanthropic entities that you've organized. Yeah, I don't even know the best way to ask the question is like, what are your thoughts based on the state of the world today? I mean, what would you speak to? Yeah, I in all honesty, I'm not going to lie. I don't know the right way to put it, so it's not my most I don't know, organized thinking. But what are your thoughts based on so much that you've done in this area, seeing how things are changing so much throughout the world?
Yeah. So I think here, and I think this thought to myself with a good amount of frequency. I think one important thing is trying to separate what stimulates some sort of psychological reaction of like anger, frustration, disappointment, sadness, etc. around things we see in the news or our reactions to certain political leaders and what they're choosing to do. To separate that and like the strength of that reaction, the strength of that negative reaction from the things going on in the world that actually matter the most. Because we have this bias, and this is a documented human bias. A researcher, Daniel Kahneman, won a Nobel Prize for looking into these ingrained biases we have, and this is one of them. That's called the affect heuristic. Our internal assumption, our internal bias that if something makes us feel strongly, we assume it's really important and the thing that we should be paying attention to. But many times it's not the most important thing. It's not the thing that has the biggest impact in the world. And so for me, like, I do feel like a good number of other people these days, like daily when I read the news headlines, I can't believe this was done. This is, terrible for this reason. But I try to divorce that instinctual reaction, that gut reaction from, okay, but in the grand scheme of things, is that the thing that's really causing the most harm or providing the most benefit? And in 98 times out of 100, it's not, even if it's still important in and of itself. I think the most important trends, the most important things going on, the things that most add to human happiness or increase suffering, same for animals, same for the environment, they're often things that are not the news headlines. And so for me, like, that's helpful, like reminding myself that is helpful because it's a good way to not get overly bothered by the negative things in the headlines that might want to make you otherwise want to pull your hair out, right? At the same time, I think it's also quite important, practically speaking, because maintaining most of our focus, at the large majority of our focus on those things that do matter most, despite what might be getting attention in headlines now, for good reason, I think is critical to having the biggest impact over the long run. So that for me is, I'd say, like the thing that I often come back to based on the things going on in politics and so forth today.
Yeah, it was like the perfect response to the question I didn't know how to craft, but it's very stoic in terms of there's noise that I can't control. I have to guard myself against that. Be aware of it, because like you said, it's a good reminder of the urgency. You know the importance of the work you're trying to do, but the noise kind of demonstrates the urgency of things that are going on. But at the same time, it's a good reminder to not fall into that, to not put all your energy into that noise, but at the same time, remember what you can effectuate, what you can put into motion. So again, I think that's a great response to a question I didn't know how to ask, but I think that is, people do need to understand is where they have the most control. So just full disclosure, I never claimed to read all the books that I invite guests on for. I haven't read your books yet. But I feel like they would be a good primer for people to utilize to understand where they can effectuate change. And I think that plays so much into society, where we're going, even AI. It's like, I think it's going to come down to where people study, research, and spend their dollars to see how the future plays out, instead of just kind of going about their days spending without really thinking where those dollars are going. So I appreciate everything you've outlined, everything you've laid out about being considerate about your decisions and being intentional about just the way we approach our everyday interactions, relationships, purchases as consumers, all of it.
Yeah. If I could pick up on that in 2 points, because I totally agree with everything you just said. So first, in terms of our ability to create positive change with the new book, What We Don't Do, and also the last one, but I think especially with What We Don't Do, I do hope that anyone that reads it leaves with a feeling of, wow, I can't believe that I have so much power to do good as I have. I never would have thought about that fact before when so much in the world seems outside of my control. And then secondly, to your second point, indeed, I think so much of this is about intentionality. And I talk about this in the book that a lot of what the book is advocating, I'd say like the quick way to take it is, quick idea is like, if you would distill it down into dramatic oversimplification, the book would basically be saying you should give more of your time, money, energy to help those who are suffering, right? But a more factually accurate way to describe it, which I think more syncs with our day-to-day experiences, it's in large part about being much more deliberate and intentional with how we use our money, time, and energy. Because I think most of us, like to your question, my answer earlier about time and our use of time, I think very few of us have sat and thought, okay, we have, 144 hours in a week? Something like that. We have 144 hours in a week. Of those hours, how many do I want to focus on things that make me happy and give me pleasure? And how many of those hours do I want to focus on helping those who are really suffering where I can help them? We just never think about it. And if you don't think about it, you're not going to almost nobody's going to carve off some time for the latter, right? Same for money, same for our mental energy. And so I think it really is just about more aligning our deeper preferences and desires for the world with our day-to-day actions where we don't really think about our long-term preferences.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it all comes, so many of the conversations on here have to do with intentionality, not being passive, not just going with the flow, not just going with the script, but actually stopping, thinking about what's important to us, assessing it, and determining what the best steps are forward. And this is just, it's another area, but it's the same kind of mindset, that intentionality. Nick, for you, we've spoken about your books, obviously. What book has inspired or made an impact on you? So we're talking about your book now. If you were to come back on, which the invitation is always open, to discuss a book that's made an impact on you, someone else's work, what book would that be?
So for me, a book that definitely, two, I mentioned that definitely shifted the arc of my own life. So one that's very specific to a lot of my professional focus over the years has been when I was 18, I was at my Hofstra summer orientation before school started, was chatting with someone there, another incoming freshman like myself, and they mentioned being against animal testing. And I never thought about this, never thought of animals at all, never had pets, just was not part of anything I'd ever really thought about. But I thought, that's interesting. I wonder why someone would be against animal testing. So when I got home, I went to the local public library in Philadelphia where I lived. There were two books on animal issues, animal protection. One was a book of sort of pros and cons of animal testing, which was pretty boring. The other book was a book called Animal Liberation by this philosopher, Peter Singer, which basically made the point that, hey, there's all these ways we cause extreme suffering to animals, especially farm animals. We don't need to do that to live happy, healthy lives. It also has all these other negative externalities. So we probably shouldn't cause all the suffering if we don't have to. And that definitely shifted my thinking around our relationship with animals. It led me to go vegetarian, start eating plant-based. It led me to start focusing a lot of my time on things that reduce animal suffering for kind of those same reasons of it's horrifically bad. It's things that go against most of our intuitions about what's acceptable and acceptable way to treat others. Nearly all of it is stuff we don't need to do. It doesn't add to our health. It can decrease our health. It doesn't protect the environment. It hurts the environment, et cetera. And so it's more just getting out of the habit or shifting our habit. So anyway, that was a book that definitely shifted both my own personal life decisions and also very much shaped what I spend a lot of my own personal time on, especially on the charity and philanthropy side. And then one other book I'll mention, which came a little bit earlier and harkens back to your questions at the start of the call about childhood influences around career trajectory. And I talk about this book in What We Don't Do as well. When I was 15 or 16, I read this book called Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing by the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard. And the book's written from a religious point of view, which appealed to me at the time because I was religious at the time. But the basic premise is one that I think applies equally well in or outside of a religious context, which is that if you believe a certain thing is true and that thing is important, then you should really think about the implications of that in all aspects of your life. And you should really try to base your life around that true, important thing. In the book, it's the idea of, if you believe in God and Christianity, then you should kind of structure your desires and your life around those aims. But outside of religious context, I think that basically what it argues for is seeking logical, rational consistency in how one lives one's life. So if you believe something is true and important, then you should live like it is true and like it is important. And so that's something that I think really stuck with me and has shaped my life since. It's not necessarily a book like I would really recommend people to read, because it's
yeah.
But it's something that shaped my life.
The question was, the ones that impacted you. It's not. It could be a recommendation, but it doesn't have to be. One that stood out to you, Nick. For you, not one of my usual questions, but in mentioning religion, that the religion in your life, I don't know the wording, was stronger, was more prevalent when you were younger. I believe you said before you're not as religious now. What was that journey like to less religion? I think it's fascinating. I'm not saying that I myself am fascinating, but I kind of understand from what I'm hearing your journey where it was a big part of the way that I was brought up. I look back as a coach now, as a father now, as a human citizen, whatever it may be. And that really founded a lot of the values that I hold today. Was reading about Jesus, as Roman Catholic, reading about Jesus, all of that as a kid, very impressionable to those stories. I'm not religious now, but it is at the core and at the foundation of who I was and who I was going to be. It really did plant those seeds. So what did that journey look like for you? Can you speak to that a bit?
Really interesting to hear that point of commonality there. For me, the point of the transition to not being religious was really just starting to read from other religions and think about other religions. And so I went from, when I was in my freshman year in college, I actually decided to drop out to become a priest. So I was still a very religious freshman year, but within a couple of years, in about 2 years, it fully moved away from it. And it really was just starting to read from other religions, from Hinduism, from Buddhism, from Taoism, from a few other areas. And that was my first real strong exposure to competing ideas. And I think being exposed to those competing ideas led me to start becoming both, first sort of more fuzzy and sort of broader in religious sentiment, and then moving from there into not being religious. Up to that point, I went to Catholic schools through end of high school, went to church every Sunday, lived in a working class Catholic neighborhood in Philadelphia. So that's just kind of like who and what I was around. I didn't have a lot of exposure outside of it. So I think it really was just that broader exposure to those other ideas that kind of led me to not being religious. But really interesting about that commonality on your end as well. And I do feel, for me, I do really appreciate and value a lot of those things that came out of it. And I do feel, while I am glad that society is becoming less religious, generally speaking, I'm glad that society is becoming less religious because I do feel that it means society is moving in a more truthful direction and an honest assessment of the reality of the world direction. On the other hand, I think it's very true that there's aspects of organized real belief in Christianity or Catholicism specifically, or et cetera, that there's some very big positives that can come from that are also drying up as society moves away from religion, at least in the U.S.
Yeah,
it'd be great to have the good without the negatives, or like the good cultural aspects without the falsehoods, and I think that's the ideal. But we see both things going on and in progress right now, I think.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And then, Nick, in wrapping up, what are you up to these days? Is there anything else that I might not have asked about that you want to share? Anything at all? The floor is yours.
For me, work focus continues to be in those areas, and always excited about some new projects, new initiatives, but continuing to focus on those areas of both investment and work on the charity philanthropy side. I guess the only thing I'd add is in terms of the book, What We Don't Do, certainly I hope that if anyone that's listening here views this general idea as being interesting or thought-provoking or something they're willing to think about or be challenged by, would hope they check it out, and always welcome folks to reach out to me if they feel I can be of any value to them in thinking about donating intelligently, using their career focusing their career in a way that has high impact, anything like that. Always happy for folks to reach out to me personally if I can be of value in those directions.
Nick, and I typically ask, but forgot to, just because I had so many other tangential follow-up questions, but I typically ask authors that come on here, do you have an idea for what the next area of writing is you may want to do, or a next book, or general, just not giving away the store, just a general direction of which way your writing might head?
I don't myself right now. All of the books I've written have been written with some very practical goal in mind, exploring something, nonfiction that explores a theme that I find valuable to me and that I'll learn from, and I think others will as well, and has to do with, I think, thinking more rigorously about making the world a better place. So I would be all but certain that whenever I eventually write another book, it's going to be in that same realm, but the specific angle no thoughts at this point. I'm definitely not a professional full-time writer. This was like What We Don't Do is worked in occasional weekends and half of vacations for several years, just fitting it in around the edges of work. So it's, I'm sure, years before I write another one, but I'm sure it'll be in that general domain when it happens.
And again, Nick shared his book, What We Don't Do, Inaction in the Face of Suffering and the Drive to Do More. Nick, thank you so much for sitting down for this conversation.
Thanks, John. Really appreciated it.
It was very interesting to learn more about you, your background, the work you're doing out there. I think just seeing in the world today what's going on, obviously me not wanting to be triggered by that, but instead trying to control what I can, doing good in my community, whatever little steps I can take. I really do appreciate this timely conversation. If there's anything I might have missed, there's so much to cover, limited time, but if there's anything that you're curious about that I didn't ask about, let me know and I'll reach out to Nick, or as he said, you can reach out to him directly. We can see what kind of insight, guidance, knowledge, wisdom we can get back from him. In the meantime, thank you for watching, listening, and subscribing, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.